Can you picture it? That early morning scene in rural India, maybe Uttar Pradesh, maybe Bihar. You've got the sun coming up, small fields, the sounds, the smells, just, the rhythm of farming life.
Absolutely, that very real, tangible world.
But then you contrast that with this other India we hear so much about, the digital powerhouse, right? The tech advancements, the global stage stuff.
And that's the core tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do those two realities connect? Or more importantly, where do they disconnect?
Exactly, because it feels like there's a growing gap. And that's what we're digging into today. We've been looking really closely at small and marginal farmers, particularly in UP and Bihar.
Yeah, focusing on the hurdles they face,
Yeah.
trying to access India's digital schemes.
And the main lens we're using is the PM-Kisan Saman Nidhi scheme.
Right. Just a quick refresher for everyone. PM-Kisan, it's basically that direct cash transfer. 6,000 euros a year going to farmers who own up to 2 hectares of land.
And intended as vital income support. And the idea, I think, was simplicity, efficiency. Get the money straight to the farmers using digital channels.
That was the vision, yeah. Streamlined, direct.
But the reality on the ground, especially with these digital requirements baked in, well, it looks quite different. That digital mandate seems to be creating some serious roadblocks.
Uh-huh. What was meant to make things easier has, in many cases, actually made access harder for the very people the scheme is supposed to help.
So the big question for our deep dive is, why? Why is this well-intentioned scheme hitting these snags? And crucially, who's getting left out in this push towards digital?
Yeah, who's falling through the cracks in this digital divide within, India's agricultural heartland? That's what we want to understand.
Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts then. PM-Kisan, digitally, it rests on a few pillars, right?
That's right. You need proof of land ownership, the records. Your bank account needs to be linked to your Aadhaar number, that national ID.
And the whole registration process is mostly online.
Mostly online, yeah. And for many farmers in UP and Bihar, these aren't just like minor administrative tasks. They are significant barriers.
It's a huge leap, isn't it? It seems logical from maybe a city office, but on the ground.
Totally. It's kind of like asking someone who's never used a computer, let alone the internet, to suddenly manage their vital support through an online portal.
Or, the analogy we discussed, like asking your dog to file its taxes online. It just doesn't compute with their reality.
Precisely. There's this fundamental disconnect between the tools being mandated and the lived experience, the capacity of many intended beneficiaries.
And it hits certain groups harder than others, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Women farmers, for instance, they often don't have land titles in their names. It's just how inheritance and societal norms often work. So, boom, they're excluded.
And tenant farmers, sharecroppers.
Same issue. They work the land, their life depends on it, but because they don't own it on paper, they're not eligible under the scheme's definition.
The numbers are quite stark there. I remember reading from the National Family Health Survey, only something like 13% of rural women in Bihar actually own land.
13%. It's incredibly low when you think about how much agricultural work women do.
Yeah, and they're just invisible in the system, aren't they?
Until maybe they get widowed and if they inherit the land. Anjali Bardwaj, the activist, put it so well. Women are invisible unless widowed and lucky enough to inherit land. That really says it all.
It points straight to that core issue. The scheme defines farmer by land ownership.
Exactly, which automatically cuts out so many people who are, by any practical definition, farmers. They're doing the labor.
It reminds me of what P. Sainath observed, farmers being income poor, data poor, and politically invisible. This digital layer almost adds another level of invisibility, doesn't it?
It certainly can intensify that marginalization, yeah.
And we heard those stories. Ramdas Paswan in Bihar, a tenant farmer, completely shut out.
Right. And Renu Devi, Miri Yadav in UP women farmers hitting walls, either with land deeds or just the complexity of getting Aadhaar linked to the bank.
These aren't just isolated anecdotes, are they? There's data backing this up.
No, not at all. Work by News Laundry, Satark Nagrik Sankathan. It shows this is a widespread pattern of exclusion tied directly to these digital and land ownership rules.
And then there are the purely practical things, like, okay, you need to register online. But what if the nearest internet cafe is miles away?
And when you get there, the connection is patchy. Maybe the portal's only in English or Hindi, which you don't read fluently.
It's just barrier after barrier. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded while riding a unicycle, as someone put it. It feels impossible for many.
It really does. It's not just about having a phone. It's connectivity, literacy, both traditional and digital language, the whole ecosystem.
So let's zoom out a bit. PM-Kisan doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's
Hmm.
part of this larger Digital India initiative launched back in 2015.
Right, and Digital India has had undeniable successes, especially in urban areas. You see UPI payments everywhere, online classes took off.
Things we almost take for granted now in cities.
But the picture in rural India, particularly for the poorest communities, it's very different.
Yeah, that study from Kalahandi in Odisha earlier this year. It showed some digital progress, sure, especially with younger, educated folks. But the majority still facing big hurdles.
And the official data on internet access in rural Bihar, it was only around 30% of households, wasn't it?
Something like that. Which immediately tells you that any online-only service is going to miss a huge chunk of the population.
Take the Agri-Market app. Sounds great. Check crop prices on your phone.
Super useful, in theory.
But if most small farmers don't have smartphones or the skills to use the app, who is it actually helping?
It's like building a fantastic tractor but forgetting to build any roads to the fields. The potential is there, but it's inaccessible.
Exactly. And this brings us back to literacy. Not just digital, but basic literacy too.
That figure for rural women in UP, 40% unable to read or write, according to the NFHS.
40%. So asking them to navigate complex government websites, it's just not feasible. It's like asking a fish to climb a tree. The basic tools aren't there.
Now, we should acknowledge, where Digital India does reach in rural areas, there can be benefits, right? Like e-learning, weather apps.
Oh, for sure, there are pockets of positive impact.
Yeah.
But the key point, I think, is that these benefits often don't filter down to the most marginalized, the ones who perhaps need the most.
And focusing back specifically on women farmers, this digital divide just seems amplified.
Massively. You've got women making up over 40% of the agricultural workforce in these states, UP and Bihar, a huge contribution
Yet they're largely invisible in schemes like PM-Kisan.
because of that land ownership issue again.
Hmm.
Patriarchal norms, bureaucratic structures, they just don't see women as the primary farmer, even when they're doing most of the work.
It goes back to that Anjali Bhardwaj quote, visible only through widowhood and inheritance, maybe?
Yeah. And even then, like with Mira Yadav's story, she inherits the land, overcomes that first hurdle, but then gets stuck on the technicalities of linking Aadhaar and the bank account.
So the system itself throws up more barriers, even if you tick the land ownership box.
Exactly. And it's not just PM-Kisan. Crop insurance schemes, like PM Faisal Bima Yojana, they also tend to favor landowners. So, again, the people doing the labor, especially women and tenants, often miss out on that safety net, too.
It's interesting how this connects to broader political commentary. I remember Sharad Pawar at a rally in 2024 saying the government seemed unconcerned with farmers' plight.
Well, you can see how prioritizing digital access and land titles over perhaps recognizing the actual labor involved might feed into that kind of perception.
It feels relevant to bring in the context of the 2020 farm bills here, too. Remember those huge protests?
Oh, absolutely. Mostly centered in Punjab and Haryana, but the ripples were felt everywhere.
The government framed those bills as giving farmers more freedom, right? Selling produce anywhere, private contracts. PM Modi called them historic reforms.
That was the official line, yes. Freedom and modernization.
But farmers, especially those reliant on the minimum support price, MSP system, saw it very differently. They feared the MSP would be dismantled, that corporations would take over.
Huge fear. And despite the government saying MSP would continue, there was this massive trust deficit.
Which led to those prolonged protests and eventually the government repealing the bills in late 2021.
Right. And connecting that back to PM-Kisan, you see a similar sort of pattern, maybe. Policies designed with certain assumptions, perhaps urban, digitally connected assumptions.
That don't fully align with the realities on the ground in many rural areas. The lack of resources, the lack of easy tech access, and that lingering lack of trust.
It seems that way. Assumptions about access and digital literacy that just don't hold true for everyone.
But okay, it's not all doom and gloom. Are there potential solutions, ways forward?
There are definitely glimmers of hope. Cooperatives, for example. PM Modi himself emphasized their role back in 2023, talking about how they can support small farmers.
And we see that working really well in some sectors, don't we? Like dairy.
Absolutely. India is the world's biggest milk producer, and cooperatives like Amul have been central to that. They've empowered millions of small farmers, including many women, giving them market access and collective bargaining power.
So the cooperative model offers a structure.
Yes, and the government's actually pushing to digitize these primary agricultural credit societies, the PCS. They've already computerized over 60,000 of them.
How could that help with accessing schemes like PM-Kisan?
Well, you could imagine the cooperative acting as an intermediary. like a shared digital hub. Farmers wouldn't need their own smartphone or digital skills necessarily. The co-op could help them navigate the process collectively.
Sort of like a shared resource point. Makes sense.
And you also see the private sector playing a role, especially in dairy again. Companies providing training, tech, market links. That's contributed to the huge milk production, what is it, over 230 million tons now.
Wow. So maybe that kind of collaborative model, government, private sector, cooperatives focused on inclusion could work for crops too.
Potentially, yes. If the focus remains genuinely on reaching those small, marginalized farmers and not just ticking boxes.
So if we were to summarize the key things that need to change, what would they be?
Okay, first, fundamentally, we have to redefine farmer. It cannot just be about owning land. It has to include everyone who cultivates tenants, sharecroppers, women, laborers. That's critical.
A definition based on work, not just title deeds. Got it. What else?
Second, tackle the digital divide head-on. That means real investment in rural infrastructure. More digital kiosks, accessible ones. Training local people to provide support people who speak the language, understand the context.
And making the online portals themselves usable, right? Multilingual, simpler interfaces.
Absolutely. User-friendly design is crucial. And third, and maybe most importantly, listen to farmers. Policies need to be shaped by their experiences, their realities. What works in Delhi might not work in rural Bihar.
So a bottom-up approach rather than just top-down directives?
Exactly. We need more than just the digital India vision. We need practical, ground-level reforms. Simplify the paperwork, boost rural internet reliably, expand digital literacy training that actually fits the context.
Because without those kinds of changes, schemes like PM-Kisan, however well-intentioned, will just keep missing the mark for so many people.
Precisely. The digital path needs to be paved in a way that everyone can actually walk on it.
Which brings us back to that central irony, doesn't it? This big push for digital transformation, potentially leaving behind the very foundation of the agricultural economy.
Yeah. It's like that hypothetical Find My Farmer app idea we joked about, highlighting how invisible these essential workers can become within complex digital systems.
And we have to remember, these aren't just statistics or abstract problems. These are people. Ramdas, Renew, Mira, individuals working incredibly hard.
They deserve a system that sees their work, that supports them, regardless of whether they own land or have a smartphone.
It really leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? As India strides towards being this digital superpower, how does it ensure these foundational communities aren't just left in the digital dust?
What needs to fundamentally shift in thinking and in policy to make that digital future truly inclusive, especially for the people who feed the nation?
A crucial question to ponder.